lovely to have you on the show. Thanks for coming on and talking about your new book.
I just feel that the media has told my story the past 2 decades, and they have no idea what I've really been through in life.
Be useful. Because this is what my father always said, Arnold.
And then I just started writing my first memory to my last, and it became this kind of 60-page poem, and I showed it to him, and he goes, okay, well...
My autobiography, Me, by Elton John. That's me.
I'm gearing up to celebrate the publication of my first book.
Well, you've written this very intimate memoir, which I read, and it's fascinating. It's a very good read by itself.
One of the best autobiographies ever written happens to be one of the first, one of the darkest, and one of the most creative. The title of Thomas de Quincey's 1821 classic says it all: Confessions of an English Eater. Yes, it's about addiction, but he uses the subject to explore something much more groundbreaking for the time: the inner self, the inner universe. We now live in an age of self-obsession.
I just told you who I thought I was. A god! I am the chosen one. Somebody had to do it.
Oscar winner George Clooney, Sexiest Man Alive, 1997.
Hi, I'm Kim Kardashian West, and I'm going to give you a little tutorial on how to take the perfect selfie. If you don't have a mirror in front of you...
The era of everybody's autobiography, as the writer Gertrude Stein said. We all have our story.
In the future, everybody will be world famous for 15 minutes. Everybody.
Celebrities and politicians sell memoirs and take part in tell-all interviews. We're surrounded by reality TV, personal vlogs and podcasts about personal growth. We live in a culture of self-development, the age of me. De Quincey's story begins with his pains and afflictions, toothache, poverty, hunger, sufferings that, quote, threaten to besiege the citadel of life and hope, in his own words. Crucially, he says, that usually guilt and misery shrink by a natural instinct from public notice. They court privacy and solitude.
I am De Quincy. I dream, and I create dreams. Out of the opium pipe.
His book is a confession because he says that usually people omit the ugly parts of their character and emphasise their successes. He wanted to challenge that. De Quincey describes the relief of taking Opium for the first time. What an upheaving from its lowest depths of the inner spirit. What an apocalypse of the world within me. He describes an abyss of divine enjoyment and a panacea for all human woes. Here was the secret of happiness about which philosophers had disputed for so many ages. At once discovered, happiness might now be bought for a penny and carried in the waistcoat pocket. Portable ecstasies might be corked up in a pint bottle, and peace of mind could be sent down in gallons by the mail coach. He uses the experience of his addiction to explore psychologically and innovatively the abyss within, what he called the apocalypse of the world within me. This gazing into the abyss within is a mode of self-exploration that's still unfolding culturally.
I'm a papa.
Compare the popular TV shows of the last year with those of just 20 years ago. From The Last of Us to The Bear to Succession, these new shows are not what they're ostensibly about on the surface, zombies, cooking or business, but are about something much more universal: character. Much of their genius, like Oppenheimer for example, relies on the shallow depth of field close-ups and on the intense emotions displayed on the torn characters' faces. So, where did this inward gaze come from? Before De Quincey's time, we have to remember that knowledge, traditionally speaking, was not about what's in here, endogenous, but what's out there, exogenous. Everything from moral rules coming from God, to science coming from studying the world, to art coming from classical models and forms, was about studying and learning from the external world. There's an incredible book on the ancient Greeks of Homer's time that influentially makes the case that the people of that period saw their emotions, passions, angers and desires not as coming from within, but as being placed upon them in the moment by the gods. Agamemnon says that Zeus put wild Ate being the goddess of mischief and delusion, in him, and made him act in a way contrary to how he usually would. He says the plan of Zeus was fulfilled. Other characters talk as if gods had taken away, changed or destroyed a normal way of thinking and replaced it with something extraordinary. In other words, character came not from within, but from without. Remember, the ancients had no real concept of personality, of biochemistry. They genuinely believed in their gods. Think about how powerful our imaginations are. Why wouldn't you believe that an intense of an experience as, say, anger and a loss of self-control that comes with it wasn't something planted there by something as extraordinary as a god? To take one more example, in the Christian framework, the self is always in reference to God. St. Augustine may have written the first autobiography, the Confessions, in the 4th century, but his aim was to conform his behaviour to the external rules of Christian teaching and God's greater will, not to discover some true self within. The medieval period was defined by roles you were born into: craftsman, butcher, peasant, lord. The rules were laid down. You didn't question them, you inherited them. But in De Quincy's time, all of this was beginning to change. De Quincy was obsessed with two poets, William Wordsworth and Samuel Coleridge. He idolised them, wrote letters to them, befriended them, and travelled here to the English Lake District where they lived. He idolised them because, like other writers of the period, people like Goethe and philosophers like Jean-Jacques Rousseau, they were all working out a new idea of the self. Wordsworth, before De Quincy, also wrote one of the first modern autobiographies, a very long poem called The Prelude, about, quote, the growth of a poet's mind, all about his childhood experiences. He admitted that it is a thing unprecedented in literary history that a man should talk so much about himself.
Wordsworth believed that the inner life, the structure, the patterns, the emotions and beliefs of the person takes the data that we get from the senses, the information, and patterns it, shapes it, raises it up even, changes it, so that each person sees a lake, for example, in a different way depending on their beliefs and ideas. This was radically new.
It all started with Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who, not long before, in the 18th century, made a profound realisation. If, as he came to argue and believe, it was the world, political systems and social norms around him, those exogenous features that were oppressing ordinary people, keeping them in chains, where was truth to be found? It could only, he decided, be found within the self.
Rousseau, in his autobiography, also one of the first, maybe the first, also called Confessions, said that I'm different to anyone that I know, maybe different to anyone in the whole world. I'm no better, but at least I am different. And he said because of that, he wanted to make his soul transparent to the reader. He said, I'm about to embark on a project that has no model and afterwards could have no imitator. Check that view out.
The historian W.J.T. Mitchell even described Rousseau as the first modern man, the great originator, he said. Goethe, the German poet, inspired by Rousseau, said that he turned into himself and found a world. Rousseau said his project was one that had no model and would have no imitator. It was an act of pure, singular, individual, irrepressible creativity from somewhere within.
The so-called spirit of the age had a profound effect on the writers of the period. Wordsworth wrote so much about this place because it was where he was from, and he thought that if you attended carefully to the local, to the individual, to the particular, you could make the ordinary extraordinary. You could find some universal lesson, or you could even feel something transcendent.
Or when he remembers stealing a boat at night when he was a child and became terrified in the middle of the lake at the dark, imposing shapes of the mountains around him, towering over him, haunting him, and he said it moved slowly through my mind by day and were the trouble of my dreams.
De Quincy admired Wordsworth so much that he moved into his cottage, Dove Cottage, just over there, after him, and at the beginning of his autobiography, with his tongue firmly in his cheek, wrote that there are no precedents for this kind of writing that I am aware. But of course, he was right, because he was writing about himself.
But this is what makes De Quincy's confessions so innovative. He focuses on what is usually swept away in our own self-aggrandizing narratives about ourselves. He says nothing, indeed, is more revolting to English feelings than the spectacle of a human being obtruding on our notice his moral ulcers or scars and tearing away that decent drapery. He took Wordsworth's exploration of emotion, feeling the self and the natural world, and applied it instead to his own warped experiences with and not the natural world, but urban life. He describes how furnished tremendous scenery in the dreams of the eater. He writes poetically about the endless self-multiplication of the self going up and down symbolic staircases and talks about the wondrous depth within.
He uses metaphors like translucent waters and shining mirrors and oceans and waters wrathful and surging to describe his own inner life.
My agitation was infinite, he said. My mind tossed and surged with the ocean. Of course, this new inner self didn't just appear from nowhere. It mirrored the scientific developments of the period. When astronomers like Galileo made observations about the universe that contradicted the taught wisdom of theology and the Bible, all of these poets and philosophers were saying, well, what about the universe within?
Wordsworth's spots of time, De Quincey's inspections of the darker side of his own psyche, Byron's voyages of self-discovery, of escape from the imposing norms of traditional society, traditional values. They all provide the foundations of modern psychology, our modern idea of the self, and they provide the primary injunction of the modern world, that you can create yourself as something new.
The autobiographical self is the model that helps us traverse the world, outside and in. The psychologist Wang has written that the autobiographical self is self-knowledge that builds upon our memories and orients us towards the future, allowing our existence to transcend the here and now moment. And it's really easy to underestimate it, but it had an incalculable effect on the culture and politics and psychologies of the modern period. These writers were a sensation across Europe, and anyone who argued for individual rights, freedoms, liberties, the power of ordinary people and democracy drew on them in some way. On the other hand, the intense focus on the I produced the narcissism and the obsessions with the self we see everywhere today. we no longer look outward as much, but spend a lot of time navel-gazing within. I think the big challenge of this century is going to be whether the world within can be reconciled with the world without. Thank you to all of these incredible Patreon supporters. These videos take a long time to research, write and make. I do a lot of reading, they're always sourced, and there's a bibliography in the description below. I've written something short on why I think this kind of well-researched long-form content is worth supporting. It's through the link below too. If you agree, then you can support Then and Now by pledging anything from $1 per month and get your name in credits, access to scripts early, and become a member of the Discord server. If you can't do that, I know everyone says this, but please do subscribe, hit the bell, like, leave a comment. These things help with the algorithm so much. I'm also trying out a newsletter. I'm going to distill and summarize each video into a quick, easily digestible email for those who don't have time or want to recap, along with some related insights. Sign up below. As always, more than anything, thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time.